Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again at Itamar. It's Friday. Let's get right down to our Torah lesson. This week's portion is not only Mishpatim, we're also reading, don't forget, another portion dealing with the half a shekel piece, which is our custom of the four different portions, additional portions we read right before, again, the month of Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar, the new month of Adar, which is the month of Purim, and takes us through Pesach. And this is a very special time, of course. It's a time of happiness. And let this happiness flow into our lives and in our Torah study. This week's portion opens up with something very unusual, in my opinion. I mean, if you think about it, last week's portion, we had an amazing event, the greatest event in all of history. Torah. God brought Torah down to the world. It's absolutely amazing. Change took place. The Jewish people have now received Torah. Taryag mitzvot, the 613 commandments were given, we know, on Sinai, all the commandments. As Rashi says right away, these are the commandments. Rashi says it was all given on Sinai, right? We know that the entire Torah was given on Sinai to Moshe Rabbeinu. And here, with so many different commandments to open up with, this week's portion, what does the Torah open up with? It talks about a person who sells himself into slavery, a Jewish slave. Of course, slavery we know is not the same concept in the modern concept of slavery. It's a much different concept. And that, in fact, there's a lot of rights to slaves in Torah. And for that reason, there's something called a slave that wants to remain in bondage, and he has to have his ear pierced, and until the Jubilee of the year, he can't get out. That's it. And the question I have, of course, is why, out of all the amazing commandments there are and amazing things, why did the Torah choose to mention the first commandment right after the portion of Yitro, learning about receiving the Torah, is to mention this commandment of the Jewish slave? Doesn't seem to fall into place. It could have picked something much more colorful, something much more happy. We spoke about happiness, a little bit more, person sold in slavery because he doesn't have money. It's something that's a little depressing. Open up with another kind of commandment. And the answer is very clear, is that the whole concept of receiving Torah, of course Hashem said to us, you were 210 years slaves in Egypt, and you were in bondage. God says, now I'm taking all that bondage away from you to be my servants. So God is saying basically, is that you've left slavery to become a slave of Hashem. And that's real true freedom. The Kuzari, the famous giant, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, writes about how his whole life is to try to reach the level of being a true slave to Hashem, which is a true freedom, because that's there's no freedom greater than being a slave to God, and not to be, God forbid, a slave to man. And therefore, the lesson of this week's portion opens up with slavery to show God is sort of giving musal. The Torah is teaching us ethics and saying, my dear friend, after the Torah has been brought to the world, how could you possibly choose slavery, to be a slave to man? Only be a slave to Hashem. You're choosing to be a slave for 50 years. Pay your debt off and get out of there. Well, why do you choose to be a slave for 50 years? That's absolutely, it's like sort of almost, a slap in the face. Hashem is saying to you, you're supposed to be my slave, no one else's slave in the world. It's a very important lesson. And that, I want to connect to something later on this week's portion. We look and we see in chapter 23, right after the Torah talks about you shall not cook milk and meat together, brings out a little goat, taking the goat, the mother and the mother's milk with the goat, you shall not cook it together. Right after that, the Torah talks about something which doesn't seem to be connected at all. It says, behold, I will send an angel before you. And this angel, right away, the Torah says to us, in order to bring you to the place which is the land of Israel, the Beit HaMikdash, the temple area, the temple site. And God says, Yishamer, you must watch his words and listen to his voice, and do not rebel against him. My name is within him. God is promising, if you listen to the angel, then I will war against your enemies, etc. So God is saying to us, giving us a warning to listen to this angel. What's going on? What is the need of this angel of it? What's this angel all about? Right away, Rashi comes and says something very, very profound and very powerful. Rashi says, Kan nitbasru shatidim lachto V'shchina omeret lehem ki lo ele b'kirbecha. Rashi is saying from here, the Torah is revealing us something that didn't happen. This is before the sin of the golden calf. Rashi is saying, be aware that the Torah is saying to us right now that in the future the people of Israel will sin with the calf, and therefore, as a result, God will send an angel. Which means Rashi is saying basically the angels are the punishment that will be sent as a result of the sin of the golden calf. And therefore, right now at this moment, of course, there's no angel here, but God is saying in the future, that's how Rashi interprets this, in the future there will be an angel sent after the sin of the golden calf. And we know if we jump ahead in Parashat Ki Tisa, which talks about the golden calf, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, praised Hashem, and he's literally jumping out of his chair and fighting, and I'm saying screaming and shouting. This can't happen. This can't happen. He's saying, God, you can't do this. We want only you to lead us, no one else. And God listens to him. Later on, we find this angel only when we enter the land. In Joshua, when there's an angel that stands before with a sword in his hand, I'm not going to get into the details then, but later on, according to Rashi, that's really when the angel appears. But this whole time, the angel did not appear really. It was something that was sort of like a threat. And God said, if you're going to sin, the angel's going to come. But Moshe Rabbeinu prayed and was pushed off to after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. In the times of Joshua, that angel appeared. And that was the sword that was standing out there. So the question, there's different interpretations. We're not going to have time now to go into different understandings of understanding this whole angel scene here over here. But I want to focus on the concept a little bit more. First of all, we see here, or I'll bring down a very important thing in Chazal. Chazal say something very interesting. Here, God is telling us, be very careful not to rebel against the angel. And our Midrash brings down something very interesting. The word in Hebrew for rebelling is al tamel, right? Do not rebel. And it says bo. Do not rebel against it. What it should have said is do not rebel against his words or against the word al tamel bo could easily be replaced in Hebrew al tamel bi. Don't change the angel with me. That's how the Midrash learns that, which means God is saying when this happens, an angel we sent, God forbid that you should be mixing up an angel with God. And that's really like a warning in itself of, according to Midrash, for something that also happened later on, that God forbid that people of Israel should not sin and adopt or confuse between an angel and Hashem. It's very important to understand that concept. And why is this warning coming in this point? I thought of something that will answer this question in two directions. Number one, according to Rashi, this whole thing comes up after the sin of the golden calf. What was the sin of the golden calf? Was that the need, the necessity, when Moshe Rabbeinu did not come down from the mountain and they turned this golden calf into an idol, it was sort of something like some kind of intermediate. The people of Israel sinned with the golden calf of turning a golden idol into an intermediate between God and them. Instead of praying directly to Hashem and realizing only one Hashem in the world and no intermediates, they actually they believed that there was a God in the world, but they said the way they can connect is through this particular idol, through this golden calf. And that was the sin. And therefore, it's so amazing that Rashi says right now, this is for the future. So right after the sin of the golden calf, right, they'd have to be warned about this problem that, God forbid, they shouldn't fall into the hand throughout history, fall into this terrible mistake of choosing intermediates, because that's a form of idol worship. And therefore, it's amazing, right after this particular warning of the angel, what does it say? It says right after that, if you look in verse number 24, it says, Lo tishtachave le'Elohem v'lo to'ovdeim v'lo ta'aseh b'kemasehem. Right away it says, right after that, you shall not bow down to their gods or serve them, v'lo ta'aseh b'kemasehem. You should not do their actions, ki hareis ta'aseh, but you should destroy their idols. Which means, right after this whole warning about the angels going to come, God's going to send an angel, God is saying, on the other hand, be very careful not to worship idols. Why is it connecting this, sending the angel to worshiping idols? Because it's so easy. Once you start seeing the power of an angel, God, that a person can turn this angel into God. It's interesting that the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam, the guide to the perplex, interprets this angel as referring to a prophet. So what can happen is, God is warning not to turn our prophets into gods. Or, according to Rashi's interpretation, it's referring to an angel. Rashi is referring to a hanagah, a special way of God runs the world. And that, and again, I have to get into this in a different class, because there's a long discussion itself called hanagah. In Hebrew, meaning how God manages the world and manifests himself in different ways, whether it's a miraculous period of history or more of a natural period. These are another lesson in itself we have to do. But I want to connect this itself to what I opened up with, the verse that before this whole thing about the angel, and warning about the angel, talks about cooking a goat in its mother's milk. And why does that come right before this whole story with the angel? And I think it has the same exact concept. A goat and the milk that comes from the mother goat, person can say to himself, wait a second, this is the same thing. There's the goat and there's the milk of the goat. Right? It comes from the mother, right? It's part of the mother, it came from the mother. So it's the same thing. And therefore the Torah is warning you cannot, of course, cook them together, the goat together with the mother's milk. How is that connected to what I'm saying before? Is that God created the entire world. You say, okay, this angel is a very holy being that came from Hashem, came from God, right? So a person can distinguish, make a mistake, and not distinguish between God and what has come from God. And therefore he could fall, God forbid, into the idol worship. That's, I think, again, it's a deep concept, but I think it's somehow in a deep way connected over here, that this is what God is saying, that when you're going to sin in the future, and the sin is amazing, that the sin was choosing an intermediate of the golden calf, God is saying right now, be very careful. Because when I do send an angel to you, you should never make that mistake of worshiping that angel. Oh, the angel is doing my work for me, right? God sent that angel. It connects to the beginning. He's one of my servants, just like we are one of God's servants. And nothing more than that. Don't turn them into gods. And therefore, only God is saying you must always look at me as the only one that you should worship. And in that way, God, of course, is promising us. And when we follow Hashem, in that way, we're blessed that God will fight against our enemies, and God will cure us from our illnesses, and God will bring us to the land that build the temple, the land that He chose for us, God willing. Shabbat Shalom, have a wonderful Shabbat, and we shall be in touch again very soon. Bye-bye.